Welcome to the Kenya Wantamanaimona Movement, the KWM podcast. Today, we're going to dig into something really important. We're exploring this idea that to understand where Kenya is today, and more importantly, to build a better future, we have to be honest about the cracks in our past. We've got to go back to the very beginning. So, let's get into it.
People didn't fight in the forest for new chains. Just let that sink in for a moment. This one sentence really captures the whole feeling we're talking about today, this deep sense of a promise that was broken. The fight for independence was supposed to be for freedom, for dignity, for a completely new start. But the big question is, what really happened when the colonial rulers packed their bags? Did the chains actually come off, or were they just handed over to a new set of masters? So let's talk about that dream. I mean, you have to imagine the hope in the air at independence. It was electric. It promised a total reset, a chance to build a nation from the ground up on fairness and justice for every single person. But as the material we're looking at argues, that beautiful dream started to crumble, and it happened fast. And it's in that gap, between the promise and the reality that our story really begins.
Look at this. On one side, you've got the promise. Dignity, land given back to its rightful owners, and a system built on fairness. But then you look at the other column and the reality is described as something totally different. New chains, the same old seat of power, just with different faces sitting in the chair. The source suggests that the hardware changed, sure, but the basic operating system of control? That stayed exactly the same. So you have to ask, how did things go sour so quickly? How did that betrayal happen? Well, the source we're examining points to some very specific failures right at the beginning. It calls them original sins that basically set the nation on a path of corruption and inequality. And it's a path we've been struggling to get off of ever since. Let's start with the biggest one, the land. This was everything. After decades of colonial rule where huge chunks of the country were taken, people rightly expected it to be returned. But the willing buyer, willing seller policy, the source calls it a complete lie. And think about it, how could the very people who had fought and bled for this land, who had nothing, possibly afford to buy it back? It was a system designed for them to lose. And so, the powerful and the well-connected got the titles, while the poor got put on waiting lists that led nowhere. And what about the heroes, the Mau Mau fighters, the men and women who sacrificed everything in the forests? What was their reward? According to this analysis, they were basically dumped, left with nothing. The real power transfer, it argues, didn't happen on the battlefield. It happened in fancy hotels, in deals cut by elites who had never spent a day fighting. This wasn't just a sad accident. The source claims it was a deliberate move to keep a certain kind of power structure in place. And then, of course, the resources. We're talking about public assets, things that belong to everyone. School plots, community lands, forests, even the banks of rivers. They all became fair game. The argument here is that the new leaders, instead of protecting these resources for the people, just started looting them, calling it development. A culture of grab what you can took hold right from the top. Now, here's the crucial part. These things, the land deals, the sidelining of heroes, the looting, they weren't just a series of unfortunate events. No, they were the very building blocks of a new system, an operating system where, as this source argues, corruption wasn't a glitch in the system. Corruption was the system. It was the core code. So how does a system like that work? Well, this slide breaks it down into 3 pillars. First, political patronage. It wasn't about what you knew, it was about who you knew. Jobs and government contracts went to loyalists, not the most qualified. Second, silence and fear. If you criticized the government, you could be arrested. Books that told the truth were banned. People learned to keep their heads down. And third, the old colonial trick, divide and rule. Pitting ethnic groups against each other became the #1 tool for staying in power. And that brings us to maybe the most powerful line in this whole analysis. Corruption was not a bug, it was the design. I'll say it again. It was not a bug, it was the design. It was intentionally built into the DNA of the new state. This wasn't a system that broke down along the way. This was a system that was working exactly as its architects intended. And let's just zoom in on this idea of ethnic favoritism for a second. The source describes this as an open, deliberate policy. Your chances of getting a good government job or seeing development in your area often depended on how your community voted. It was a systematic way to reward loyalty and punish dissent, and it carved deep divisions into the country that we are still dealing with. Okay, so after laying all of that out, which is pretty heavy, the source makes a really important turn.
It says that understanding this painful history isn't about getting stuck in the past. It's about empowering us to finally break the cycle. It's a diagnosis, right? And a good diagnosis is the first step toward a cure. It's a call to stop patching up a rotten system and start building a new one. And this is where the Kenyatta movement says you can actually start building. It's not just talk, it's a platform for action. The invitation is clear. Go to the website, www.wantamnatam.com. It's simple. You create an account, find your home county, and you start sharing real ideas for change. It's about moving from being a spectator to being a builder. And if you're wondering why this is so urgent right now, it's because that cracked foundation from 60 years ago isn't just history. We are all living in the house that was built on it. And the legacy of those cracks, as the source points out, is something we see and feel every single day. This slide just lays it out perfectly. It draws a straight line from the cause to the effect. Those backroom deals and the politics of ethnic favoritism from the past, they didn't just fade away. They grew into the massive inequality and the toxic divisions that define so much of our society today. It's the reason you see unbelievable wealth right next to crushing poverty. And these aren't just abstract ideas. These are real-world problems. We see it in the heartbreaking rates of youth unemployment. We see it in our schools, so overcrowded that learning becomes almost impossible. We feel it in a healthcare system that is struggling to meet the basic needs of its people. These are the bills that have come due from a system that was built for the few, not for the many. Now, whenever you talk about this stuff, someone will inevitably say that criticizing our nation's founders is unpatriotic. But the source makes such a powerful counter-argument here. It says that true patriotism isn't blind loyalty. It's demanding accountability. To criticize failure isn't an act of hate, it's an act of care. It's what you do when you love your country and want it to be better. And that brings us to the most important part of this whole discussion, the solution. The past is written in ink. We can't change it. But the future? The future is an empty page. And the focus now shifts entirely to the power of ordinary people to demand and to create real change from the ground up. So here's the big question, right? How can we, as ordinary citizens who often feel so powerless against this huge, entrenched system, how can we actually begin to flip the script? Where do you even start when the problem seems so big? Well, the path laid out here is actually very practical. It starts small. First, you gather your peers, your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues. Then, you start asking the tough questions. Where's the money for that local road project going? Why was that contract given out? Third, you use platforms to share ideas and build networks with people outside your bubble. And finally, together, you start to challenge corruption wherever you find it. Change doesn't start at the top. It starts in your own community. And that's really the whole philosophy of the Wantam Natam platform. It's not meant to be a spectator sport. It's not just another place to complain online. It's designed to be a tool for action. It's for posting real, concrete ideas, for finding collaborators, and for challenging the old way of doing things that has held us back for so long. The future is still open, still unwritten. It's time to stop recycling broken systems and start building new ones. This is such a hopeful message. The cycle of electing new people who just continue the same old patterns of theft, that cycle can be broken. The future, as the source says, is an open page and is waiting for us, for this generation to write a brand new story. Never, ever believe that what you do doesn't matter. Your single voice, your one idea, when it joins with others, becomes a force that cannot be ignored. It can create a ripple that can change your village, then your city, and ultimately the entire nation. So the invitation is there. Join the movement. Be part of that ripple. So the final call to action is simple, it's direct, and it's for right now. Don't wait for someone else to do it. Visit www.wantamnatam.com. All 47 counties are right there. Find yours. And just post one simple idea that you believe could make your community better. The time to start building is not tomorrow, it's now. Thank you for listening to the Kenya Wantam Natam Movement, KWM podcast.